It's actually crazy. We're finally in a new patch. It's honestly felt like it's been forever, but here's the Autumn's tier list. I kind of gave it what, guys? It's been like I think it's been like a week since the patch came out or so. So I figured I'd give it a little bit of time. I maybe could have given it more, but yeah, here we are, and hopefully the tier list is all right. So Twitch chat and we came up with, like, I guess a little bit of wording so it's more clear on why exactly I'm putting a legend in each area. So S tier. Basically, if you're an S, then you're going to probably excel in more than one area. And even if it is one area, you're probably going to be doing it extremely well to the point where it's like, it's better than basically everyone else. A, self-explanatory, well-rounded. B, some flaws. C, where major flaws come in. And then D tier, I don't think any legend in the game, I always say this, I think every legend in the game can win. But at the same time, at the end of the day, there are legends, or a legend or two, that I just think, what's the whole point of even playing them? I think there's probably legends that do it better, so let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start going straight down the list. I think Thatch right now, I'm going to say he has some flaws. They did remove his true combo on guns, so you can't do D-Light Ensig anymore. That's actually a pretty big deal, because now it's kind of a question of why exactly are you even playing this character? He still has insane sword sigs, but that, like, removing that combo and also the fact that he has low defense kind of hurts him a bit. I think we have to put Ada in C, because even though Thatch does have, the same defense as Ada, and I honestly think they rebuff Spear a bit, they remove some recovery frames on Ser. I think Ada's blasters, when it comes to the signatures, I think Side Sig is really good. I think End Sig can be pretty good. D Sig is like non-existent. But with just how blasters are right now, it's kind of hard to really gauge where to put blaster characters in general. So I'm going to say, because of the low defense, because the blaster sigs aren't that great, then she's going to have some major flaws. Now, if you're playing a lot more Spear, then I would say probably would just go up here in B. But for now, I think it's good if we just keep Ada in C. So I want to say now, before we get super deep into the video, that some of these may change by the end. Like, I'll complete everything, and then myself and Twitch chat, we're probably going to, like, order at least S tier. But for now, I'm going to put Sentinel in A. They did nerf him a bit. Now, this is one of the issues with doing the tier list, I guess, a little earlier than normal, is the fact that I haven't really gotten to check out all the legends, but I know he definitely got hit. There were certain things changed about him. But at the end of the day, I think at worst, this guy's going to be the top of A. It's just kind of a question to see how he plays out with the meta now, because he very well could be excelling in more than one area, but at worst, he's still extremely well-rounded. Unlike Sentinel, I think Lucian, I feel a bit better about putting him in A, personally, because I'm a bit more familiar with him. He wasn't directly changed too much. I mean, I guess you could say indirectly, because they changed Katars a bit. But at the end of the day, he's still super well-rounded. I mean, Katars are overall strong still. His signature kit in general, specifically on Katars, is still really good. The stat spread does have lower strength, but at the same time, higher defense and some of the highest speed in the game. So, I mean, if you're looking for a Blasters character to play, he's definitely one of the ones you want to check out. Taros is an interesting pick. I tried to have chat point me in the right direction with this one. I think before the patch, if Taros wasn't changed at all in this patch, right, I think he would 100% be an S tier, no question about it. Now, keep in mind, he's the only one going to be in here for the time being. I'm going to say he's an S tier. He's really easy to use. The stats are overall really good. Also, the weapon combination. I think the weapon combination is probably one of the weaker things. And the SIGs that he has, I think, still overall are probably pretty good. They definitely saw a little bit of nerfs, but, you know, the thing is, you can't... The changes in Brawlhalla when it comes to signatures, when it comes to recovery frames added and stuff like that, like force changes, it's usually not that much. It's a lot of, I don't know, it feels like fake nerfs half the time, right? So I'm pretty sure he's going to remain in S tier, but I guess we'll see how everything plays out. Okay, it only feels right, given that Taros was put up here, I kind of have to put Bryn up here as well, just for the fact that Spear... I guess it got buffed by a little bit. They did remove 2 of the recovery frames that they added out of the 3 in a previous patch to Spear, so that definitely helps it a little bit. Bryn overall has had SIGs that are crazy. They didn't change it all, right? The last change that happened, I think, was actually the down SIG damage. But even then, when you look at just the kit in general, especially if you're playing this character in 2s, this character is going to be awesome. Spear is fantastic. Axe is just dummy easy to use, and the signature kit overall is really strong. Has 7 speed at base. You could push it higher if you want, but it's kind of up to you on what you want to do. Like Sentinel, Asuri did get hit by the patch a bit because she is a Katar legend and also a sword legend. Both of those weapons got nerfed. I think if sword didn't get changed at all, I would have no problem probably putting Asuri in S, but because sword did get like the 3-piece removed, most of the time it does work at very specific instances, but a lot of the times now when you hit like a D-Light Dare on sword, you're not really going to be able to work with it much. And like I said, Katars also to get changed a bit. The signatures, nothing crazy, you know, the stats, they're nothing crazy either. They're overall, I would call them well-rounded, so Asuri fits right in. I'm going to put Barraza in A. I think Barraza is definitely one of the better blaster legends this patch. Definitely one of the easier ones to use. If you're going to notice anything about this tier list, it's probably that Axe is going to be definitely dominant in like A and S to some degree. I mean, there will be other things, but that's a big reason why I'm putting Barraza here. If Axe was worse, I would have no problem with dropping him down a tier. But given that Axe is so easy to use and it is pretty rewarding currently, I think this is a pretty fitting spot. His stats also, higher defense, mediocre speed, decent strength, and like 4 dex, I think. That's pretty good overall. Now, blasters, they do get countered by certain things a little bit, but I think they're not the worst thing in the world. You just have to be really, really on your game to like find a lot of success with them. So overall, I would definitely say that he's well-rounded. And when I say a legend, by the way, has some flaws or major flaws, I'm talking about like the legend themselves. I'm not necessarily looking at the matchups that they have, even though in some cases I think it may be important to mention it. All right, now some people maybe would put Ember higher, but I'm going to say Ember is going to have some flaws. I think the signature kit is awesome. I think Bow is extremely strong, and I think guitars are still really good. The stats, though, that obviously is going to hurt a little bit if you notice the trend, right? Lower defense legends are always going to be a bit lower unless they have something that is just absolutely ridiculous about them. Also, something that I think a lot of people are going to ignore is the fact that Ember in 2s is probably one of the worst picks like you could ever have in 2s. It just doesn't make sense to really ever play Ember. I've never even seen anyone try or consider the character. So I would say that's a flaw too, right? You're pretty much restricted to one game mode with this legend. So that's why Ember's going to stay in B. I'm going to put Azoth at the tippity top right now just because I think Azoth is like the defining character this meta. He has Bow, he has Axe, he hasn't been touched at all. The signatures are overall pretty nuts. I mean, the stats as well. I think the stats are probably his weakest point, but other than that, the character's doing exactly what S tier says they do. He's definitely excelling in more than one area. You know, both the weapons not touched at all by the patch. Is extremely good in 1s and 2s, I think. You just have to have the right person to play him. For the time being, now this one's a little hard because I just don't know how big the sword changes are, and maybe my opinion will change literally by the end of the video, but I'm going to say right now, Bolivar's going to go in A. The signatures didn't change at all. The signatures were amazing. Sword overall is still really good, and his hammer, I think, is one of the better ones for sure. And the stats, even the stats, like you can have 7 strength, 5 dex, 5 defense, 5 speed. That's pretty good. But I think right now, I think that Sentinel and Bodvar, it's basically, if you're not going to play one, you might want to try out the other, right? They're basically two sides of the same coin. They're both stronger hammer legends. It's kind of like, okay, do I want Katars or do I want sword? That's kind of how I see them. To me, Koji's an instance of where high dex is actually really, really good. So for the time being, I'm going to put Koji in S tier just because the bow changes that they gave him, the bow desig change, doesn't seem to really be that much different. Also, again, the high dex on both weapons actually feels good. It makes him feel worthwhile. The stats, though, still are his like weakest area. But in this case, I think it works for him. So I think it's pretty safe to say that out of like most of the sword legends right now, out of pretty much all of them, he definitely belongs here in S. I think a big appealing factor of Ulgrim is the fact that he's just so easy to use. But with that being said, he's gonna have some pretty big flaws. His defense is super nice. You know, the weapon combination, like I said, is really easy to use, but I think that can kind of work against him. I think his signatures, unless it's... The axe signatures overall are pretty good. I think his lance signatures are pretty mid. They're nothing to write home about. They're all okay. So if you're running into certain legends, you're definitely going to have some troubles. But at the same time, if you're looking for an easy lance legend to play, then he's definitely a go-to character. So I think if I'm going to have Koji in S tier, because I think at this point, Koji's probably considered to be the best bow legend in the game. I'm going to put Diana in A just because I think that blasters, there are still pretty easy ways to counter them, and they're definitely one of the harder weapons to play. If you're not able to really make use of blasters, then you're pretty much stuck on bow, which in Diana's case isn't a big deal. The stats also, they're pretty well rounded. I don't think they work against her at all. It's pretty common to take away dex to add to speed, so then you'll have pretty much like reverse Bodvar stats, right? You'll have 5 strength, 5 dex, 5 defense, and then you'll have 7 speed. Also, you know, solid in 1s and solid in 2s. I just think that given just how it pans out, if Koji's going to go in S, then I think it definitely just makes sense to put Diana in A. So out of a lot of the lower defense legends, I think Jala's going to get a bit of a pass just because the signatures all around are crazy good. And also, Axe is definitely like heavily favored in the meta right now, and Sword still is pretty decent even with the nerfs. So I honestly think I'm going to put Jala, you know, this isn't ordered for the time being. I'll do that at the end with the help of chat. But I'm going to say Jala's just going to go in A. Now, yeah, the one like bad thing about her is that she is lower defense, but Axe, Sword, Sigs all around are really good. Extremely strong in 1s and 2s. And if you're just looking for like a really good entry-level Axe character, I think Jala is a good one to play. I think if Core didn't get the Ensig change to his hammer, because before, previous patch, if you guys didn't know, he had D-Light Ensig True, and I think it did around 35 to 37 damage. I'm pretty confident in that. And then they removed it, like they did with the Taros D-Light Ensig. And they also nerfed Gauntlets a bit. So Core is still really, really good. A higher defense Gauntlet legend. All the Sigs are super straightforward, and they hit extremely hard. Incredible in 1s and 2s. So for sure he's going in A tier, but I just don't... It's hard for me to put him in S right now. So Shang's an interesting case because, yeah, Gauntlets did get nerfed, but I've been saying this character is the best Spear legend for a while now. I think his stats work perfectly with both Gauntlets and Spear. Gauntlets, they did get nerfed, but the Gauntlet kit that this character has is extremely good. And also, I think a big important factor with like to know about this character is that now that they nerfed the stun on Nair for Gauntlets, he's one of the few characters, given he can go higher dex, you can make the Nair into GC Light, I'm pretty sure, pretty consistently unjumpable. I think it's like position dependent right now, but yeah, for higher dex characters like Shang, it's definitely really, really good, and you're definitely going to be consistently getting it. Also, Gauntlets just straight up counter Axe, I think. Even with them being nerfed, I think they're really good into Axe, and Axe is like at the top of the meta. So I think that factor alone is extremely good. And it also doesn't feel right to really put Shang up there without putting Val. I think Val, even with the Ensig nerf in particular and the Gauntlet nerf, like I said, I think Val is like an extremely good counter to Axe in general, specifically like Taros, and Taros I think is pretty good right now. It's just like the Sword Gauntlet combination is awesome, and the stats on the character are still really good. Now, Val's Sword Ensig, let's talk about it. Val's Sword Ensig got like 2 or 3 recovery frames added onto it. I don't remember exactly, but it doesn't really matter because I don't think how punishable it was necessarily the problem. Now, yeah, it definitely helped previously in the previous patch, but if people knew you were going to do it and like you tried to hit them grounded with it, they're still more than likely going to be able to punish you. It's just now that window has been increased a bit, which I don't think is the main thing. I think the main thing is the fact that it's a slightly harder Sig to hit grounded now. Like you can't really hit them super like far out. You have to be like more stacked with them to hit it on the ground now, which I think is a good change. I think it was needed. But at the end of the day, the Sig is still going to be super useful because a lot of the times, what's the purpose of the Sig? You're going to be trying to catch them in the air. Also, Val's signature kit all around. You could say, I guess, aside from D-Sig on Sword, is still super, super good. Like, that's a huge thing with both of these characters. But yeah, I think they're definite S tier. I know some of you might be questioning what exactly I'm doing by putting another character in S tier, but it's just how it's laid out. It's how the list is laid out. I'm just going down the line. Ragnar is extremely good. I think he's probably, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess, in the comments, but I think he's right now the most well-rounded Qatar kit, which is extremely good. There's not a single Qatar Sig that's really bad. His Axe, I mean, side Sig on Axe is still really strong, and Sig on Axe is incredible. And then D-Sig on Axe is like very mediocre, but that's whatever. His stats also are pretty solid. I mean, you can bring him up to 7 defense if you wanted to by sacrificing a dex, which I think a lot of people like to do. But yeah, he's just another Axe character that is really thriving this patch. Cross is going to go in B. Now, it's not organized, but I think Cross has extremely strong SIGs, probably some of the hardest hitting in the game. I think both of his weapons, they're okay, but they suffer from like the same bad matchups, I think, right? You look at Sword. I think Sword can do pretty well into Gauntlets and Blasters. Katars, I think, are a big one. Katars have always been like a natural counter pick, I think, to both weapons. Bow even, right? Like, they're just really good at getting inside Cross because Gauntlets, I think, they suffer from the lack of range. And then you have guns, which like suffer heavily from like their dead spaces and whatnot. So they both have like the same bad matchup. So that's why I'm going to put them in B. But yeah, it's kind of counteracted by the fact that the stats are really good and the SIGs are just incredibly hard hitting. So right now I'll say this. I think Mirage is definitely going to go in S, but I'm going to put her towards the back end for now. I think the stats overall, really, really good. I think Mirage goes in S because of the stats being pretty good for the Legend. I think the Scythe and the Scythe D-Sig are a big benefit. And then I think the Spear kit in general, like the Spear signature kit, is insane. I think it's second only behind Wushang. I mean, there's not really much else to say. Scythe is a really good pick right now. Spear is pretty solid overall, and just that higher strength is also like a really big help. Probably the easiest way to explain why Cassie is in B is simply because of the speed. 4 speed is so like bad. It does not feel good at all to play, but the signatures of this character are so unreal. They're so good that it's hard to put her any lower. So I'm just going to leave it at that. That's kind of why Cassie just goes in B, just straight up. Given how I view guns, and also given that I think Nyx is definitely one of the harder legends to use, even though I think the stats are absolutely nuts, I think that Scythe in particular on this character is so good. You have, like, I mean, N-Sig on Scythe, Side-Sig on Scythe, even D-Sig on Scythe. They all have really good force. And, like, the N-Sig on Scythe in particular is a straight-up sniper shot, so that's awesome. But I think when you're running into a lot of these, like, Axe Legends or stuff that just counters guns in general, you might be having a bit of trouble with Nyx. So that's why I'm going to put her in A instead of S. I mean, I think if you're, like, nuts with the character, this character would look fantastic. Probably one of the best in the game. But the likelihood of being able to play like 110% with Nyx like all the time is just so low. Another really solid choice right now if you're looking to still play Gauntlets, because Scythe is probably going to be one of the better weapons this patch, is, you know, how it's panning out to be. You know, Mordex, I just got to sauce him right now, straight up in S. They nerfed the D signature on Gauntlets by 3 frames. Okay, like, you still feel safe a lot of the times when you use it. The force is still incredible. Forget the D-Sig altogether. Look at the Scythe N-Sig. Look at the Scythe Sides. Just look at the Scythe kit in general. And basically look at every signature aside from maybe the Gauntlet N-Sig. And even when you hit the Gauntlet N-Sig, that Sig has so much force. Like, you don't even know what to do with it, right? Like, you could forget that Sig altogether and still the rest of the signature kit is awesome. But, yeah, like I said, he's one of those characters where if you're looking to still play Gauntlets, I think he's definitely a good one to try out. And just, like, overall, there's not really a single thing bad about this character. Like, imagine if they did nerf Gauntlets. This character would probably easily be, I would say, probably, like, right at the top of the list with, like, Val, maybe. Okay, I think I'm going to play it safe and put Yumiko in B. Now, Yumiko, I think, is hard carried by the hammer signatures in particular. The bow signatures, the bow D-Sig on ledge still drops a ton, although it, you know, it still has a pretty cool signature. The bow N-Sig and the bow Side-Sig are pretty, like, mediocre. But the hammer is just so good, and high dex on both of the weapons actually does feel good, although you are going to be running lower strength and like lower defense as well a lot of the time. But, you know, Yumiko, I think Yumiko can definitely be a B tier character. I think the flaws mainly come in the fact that right now what's dominant is like Axe, and I think with like Axe and Gauntlets, just certain weapons that Yumiko may have to play into. It's just a question of like, why play Yumiko when you could play like Azoth, right? Or like even Koji. It's just really a question of like, why play this character when I could play another that has potentially better stats, better SIGs, and another weapon that I may be better with or is like more worthwhile with investing in. Artemis is a freebie Esther to me. I think the one thing you could really harp on her about is Lance, but even then, look at the stats, right? You can go to 9 speed free. Scythe doing pretty well right now. Lance is all right. I think Lance is, like I said, the weakest thing about this character. But even then, you look at literally every single signature on this character, and it is unbelievable how good they are. You can also do Sidelight and Sig on Scythe. Basically, every time they have no dodge, you're going to have that guaranteed as like an option to you if you hit Sidelight, soft Sidelight. So it's just super good. There's just not much else to really say about Artemis. Like, if you haven't messed around with Artemis at all, just with Training Room, anything like that, definitely do it, and I think you'll understand what I mean. So Caspian has been a weird character to see, like his evolution, right? He's gotten a ton of buffs, like signature-wise, and then Gauntlets and Guitars were really good at the same time, but still, like, nobody was playing the character. And then now, with this current patch, Gauntlets got hit pretty hard, and then Guitars also got tagged as well. So I'm just gonna sauce him in A. I don't really have much to say about him. His signatures are still really, really good. If you're good with both the weapons, you're gonna find success. But again, it's just a question. It's like Yumiko. Why really bother playing Caspian when right now you could play Vow, you could play Shang, Mordex, even like, I don't know, even like a Suri or something. Just like have a string weapon with you, right? Have the Guitars or Gauntlets, and then just pair it with something else. Don't necessarily pair it with another shorter range weapon. I don't know how people feel necessarily about Canon in general right now, but I think it's pretty safe to put Sidra in A. The signatures overall on this character are still really good. The stats are still really, really good. Cannon overall, I think, is pretty good, and then Sword, even with being nerfed, is still like a solid weapon to fall back on. So I think that's literally the definition of A tier, just a well-rounded legend. It's hard for me to think about something in particular that this character is going to be doing exceedingly well, but yeah, I think this character just falls right in A. Okay, I'm always looking for a reason to put Zol like really high on a tier list. I think this character is insane. Like, the signatures aren't good with this character. Overall, I'll say the signatures are not that good, right? But I think high strength on both Cannon and Axe are still ridiculous. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna put him in S. I really want to. I think in 2s he's 100% an S tier legend. In 1s, sure, I guess there are ways to counter him. Namely being like Gauntlets or something, or maybe Bow, Sword, whatever, right? There's legends that can maybe do well into him. I'm gonna say, and like I said, this tier list isn't really organized, and I'm really gonna organize only the S tier. I'll put him top of A, just because I think out of a lot of the legends on here, he's like Taros, where he's easy to use. I guess he has his flaws, and he doesn't really have that much of a signature kit. But the character is, dude, he's a mean guy. I'm not too sure where Kaya falls. It's definitely somewhere in A or B probably. But you know what? Why not? I'm gonna put Kaya in B. My issue with Kaya, and I played Kaya around like winters when Kaya was like at her peak, right? Now, yeah, they nerfed Bow, and I guess they nerfed Spear, and then they kind of rebuffed it a little bit. I never thought Kaya was good in 1s to begin with. And after playing her in 1s, I kind of was like, okay, never again. This character does not feel good to play in 1s. Now in 2s, it was a different story. I think in 2s, Kaya is like an insane support character. So I'm going to say the flaws for her are that sometimes finding a kill can be a little hard, even though the stats are like really solid, like high defense, high speed. So you're going to be getting around really quick, and you're not really going to be dying super early. But at the same time, if you can't really place the signatures, it's going to be kind of hard to kill with the legend, I think. And really the only time I find this character to be super good is in 2s. And 1s, yeah, if you know the ins and outs of the character, you're probably going to find some success. But I definitely think Kaya is a big 2s character at heart. So that's why I'm going to put her in B. I'm doing this one without like any hesitation. I'm just going to sauce Isaiah in C. Now, does this mean like Isaiah's bad? No, I just think there is absolutely no reason to play him over any other canon legend in the game right now. Think about this. The signatures, overall, I don't even think the signatures are that bad. They have, Isaiah has a couple good ones. Blaster N-Sig, Blaster D-Sig. Pretty much the useless ones are like the side SIGs. But the stats are pretty whatever. The weapon combination, cannon plus blasters. Why would you really bother playing that, really? There's better picks for both. So that's why I'm going to say he has his major flaws. Still overall a solid legend, right? It might feel weird to see Ada and Isaiah in the same tier, but it's just like, it's a question of why really play this character? even though, you know, they have some things that are good about them. So that kind of saves him from going down in D, but at the same time, I have trouble putting him up any higher just because there's very blatantly, like, better picks. I think it's pretty easy to put this character in A right now. I mean, like I said, Sword got nerfed, but Scythe is really good. They've kind of forced him super hard up, like, I feel like rankings, just because even though the character's stats I do not really care for, the weapon combination is still really good. And then, dude, the Sword Sigs, every time I placed Jiro on a tier list, I don't know what they were thinking about the Sword Sigs. I'm not going to say much more, but they just hit so hard. It's hard to argue and put him any lower. I think a big carry for Orion is his signatures. So again, he's another legend that's going to go in A. A lot of the times on my tier lists, if you look back, I think what happens is there are a lot of characters that end up falling in the A category, because I do think there are a lot of well-rounded characters. But the reason that Orion, I would say, is well-rounded and really goes in A is just because the stats, you can have some pretty alright stats with him. If you wanted to, you could go up to 7 defense. But at the same time, I think the signatures kind of counterbalance, like, maybe the flaws that he has. Like, having Spear and Lance, I don't think that's necessarily the best combo in the world. But when you look at just all the signatures, overall, they're really, really good. I think Lin Fei is kind of like an odd legend to place on tier list, because if you're going to play super high dex, and when dex benefits Katars or even Cannon, then the character is usually really, really strong. I think Lin Fei has an incredible Ensig on Cannon. Overall, like, the signatures, you know, they're all right. You can find places to put them. But I'm going to say Lin Fei has some pretty big flaws. The stats, unless you're playing high dex Katars, right, you're going just all out 9 dex with this character, it feels like there's not much of a reason to really bother with that. Because you're going to be gaining a few things. Obviously, with 9 dex, the character is actually going to feel pretty smooth to play. But I'm going to say this character 100% has some major flaws. The stat spread can either work for you or very much against you. Weapon combination, I mean, when you think about it, unless you're really placing your N6s on Cannon, I think finding a kill can sometimes be somewhat frustrating. But yeah, Zariel's hard for me to place because I think the character could be A, but I'm going to put them in B for now. Mainly just because I think with Zariel, Gauntlet D6 still drops rather frequently, and that's kind of a big deal, to basically not know if your signature is going to fully connect, and it's one of the better signatures on the character as well. I think the stats on the character are all right. It's basically Barraza stats if you take Speed Stance, except you have Bow and you have Gauntlets. Bow is really good right now. The signatures overall are strong. It's just hard to really play Zariel because there's not much of a sample size to go from. And, you know, like I said, there are signatures that do drop with the D-Sig. Stats are okay. Definitely a higher defense legend, and Bow is really good right now. It's just hard. I think it's just a safe answer to put Zariel in B. For the time being, I'm going to put Rayman in S. They did nerf his axe, and they did help out his Gauntlet kit a little bit. Now, Gauntlets, yeah, they did get nerfed, but overall, the character I'm willing to bet is still the same. I've never been much of a Rayman player, but we all know how good he was. And even if you tune him down a little bit, if you still know where to place certain signatures, it's going to be really, really good, right? If you still know how to place an X D-Sig, it's still going to hit super hard. And now there's more incentive to even use his Gauntlet signatures, which I don't think there was that much incentive before. Even though they were a little bit like, you know, they were smaller buffs, it still definitely helps him out a bit. When looking at the rest of the characters, they all have extremely solid signatures. The stats also are very, very good. That's something that Dusk kind of lacks compared to the rest, that, you know, all of these characters have lower decks and then stats overall that are just insanity. Like, it's like they literally wanted Ord to succeed so badly, so they gave them all, like, absurd stat spreads, and each in their own way. Like, right? Like, you have Petra and Fate, super high strength and super high speed, both of them. Like, they're literally flip-flop by, like, one stat. And then Thor, higher defense, but also still, I think, like, mediocre speed, mediocre strength, but also lower decks. So they're all really, really good. I'm going to say that signatures for Dusk are a huge carry for him. It's also hard to say where Orb falls exactly in the grand scheme of everything. I'm I'm going to put Dust just because of his stats. I'm going to put him at the top of A. Like I said, it's not organized, but I think it's safe to say that he definitely would be towards the top. And then just to make it quick, again, this isn't organized yet, at least. I'm just going to throw the rest of the orb characters in S. Thor, high defense, insane in 2s. Also, I think in 1s, he can be a really solid pick as well if you're looking for like an alternative to Bodvar. I think that Petra, incredible SIGs, incredible stats, good in 1s and 2s. Fate, probably better in 1s than 2s, I would say, but also the stats are really, really good. And the signatures, I mean, they're really solid as well. And Scythe in particular is something that's super strong this patch. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go and say Vector, honestly, has some pretty massive flaws. And it's kind of similar reasons to like Lin Fei and Isaiah. Lance is Lance. You know, some people think it's good. Some people think it's just not that great at all. The stats, though, the stats are really strong. Higher defense, and he does have higher speed. But the question comes into play, why kind of bother with him when there are other legends? Now, like I said, the stats and some of the signatures, the bow kit's awesome, and bow in general is really, really good. So if you're going to play him for that, then he's probably like an A, or you could honestly probably even put him up to S, right? But Lance and some of the Lance signatures, namely the Lance D signature, just not that good. Again, he's just the legend that's hard to place because, like some others, like Zariel, I think that there's just such a small sample size. Like there's Dolan in Southeast Asia, who I don't really watch like many other regions aside from like Brazil, some Europe, and then a lot of North America. And no one in those regions is really playing Vector. I just remember seeing Stingray play this character once, and other than that, no one's really been playing this character. So there's some really good things about this character, but I think there's some major drawbacks as well. Okay, this is where I think I'm going to have to explain myself maybe to some a little bit. Now, Volkov, I wouldn't even necessarily say is a very well-rounded character. It's just that, yeah, he does have like 4 speed. You can fix that if you wanted to bump it up to 5, but I think a lot of people, what they prefer to do is they'd rather take the strength stance since that detracts from his dex. His stats are horrible. I think that's like the biggest thing to note about this guy. If his stats were even like Jiro level, right? If they were like Jiro stats, I think this character would for sure be S tier, and I think no one would really say anything. They would just kind of understand it. His SIGs overall they don't even make sense. Like the signatures, they did nerf, I think, the side SIG on Scythe a little bit. They nerfed the fixed force, but the signatures have such a little lag. They all feel really good to use, and a lot of them, they have good force behind them. I think he's a Scythe character that you could play in 1s or 2s. I think honestly, yeah, either game mode can work with him, but it's just like he does definitely have more than one area he excels in, and it's just that he excels in them so well, I think we're able to ignore the downsides at least a little bit, which would be the stats 100%. So they did make Onyx D-Sig on Gauntlets. They nerfed that a bit. They gave it more recovery, and then also, I believe on Side Sig, they trimmed the hitboxes a bit on Cannon. With that being said, though, I think for the most part, Onyx is still Onyx, which is the best Cannon legend in the game. You know, Gauntlet nerf, I guess, hurt a little bit, but the stats are still incredible overall. And if you can deal with the Gauntlet nerf, right, if you're still solid with Gauntlets, I think this legend can be a really, really good pick. There's not much else to really say. Does really well in 1s and 2s. Yeah, it's just kind of like one of those things like, okay, do I care about playing Cannon, really? So Vrax is kind of an oddball because Vrax has some insane signatures overall when you look at like Gun D-Sig, when you look at just the Lance kit as a whole. But then when you look at the stats, you look at some of the matchups he has, especially with what's going to be probably really good right now with how the meta's kind of panning out to be. When you look at like Azoth, Koji, Vow, I don't know, Taros, Bryn, just characters like that. And the fact that he does have Lance, I think that definitely hurts him a bit. He's a legend that does feel really, really good to play, but of course, I would say for sure, especially compared to some other Blaster characters, some of his flaws are pretty notable, so I don't really want to put him any higher, although his strengths are still extremely good. I'm going to go out on a limb, and even though we don't see Greatsword played that much, and yeah, it did get nerfed, I think it's still fair to say that both, honestly, be real, I think both Mako and Jaehyun are still probably going to be S tier. I still think Greatsword, you know, and I can't really back it up because I'm not playing the weapon much or doing anything with it. I still think Greatsword is super strong, even with the nerfed finishers in the most recent patch. When you look at the signatures of Jaehyun, and you look at the weapon combination Jaehyun, you look at the stats of Jaehyun, I think overall, he's more well-rounded. He's probably the best, most well-rounded Greatsword in the game, most well-rounded Greatsword legend in the game. Sword's just such a good weapon to fall back on. All the signatures are super solid. Mako is more of a legend where I feel like you don't have sword to fall back on. You have guitars instead. But I think as a Greatsword legend, Mako has the better Greatsword, has maybe stronger stats in certain aspects. But if you're forced to fall back on guitars most of the time, it's, you know, it might not be as preferable, even though the signatures still overall are really, really good. So for the time being, I'm going to throw both of them in S. I guess we'll just see how it changes. The one saving grace about Nash, honestly, is the fact that this character... I'll say that this character has pretty good stats. Like, you know, high speed is always nice. Lower dex spear isn't that great. The signatures are pretty good, and I think this character overall is a really good 2s legend. In 1s, though, I kind of question the purpose of playing this character. There's other characters that you could probably do better with. Now, yeah, the spear change probably helped them at least a little bit again. But I don't know. It's just always a weird thing for me to rank Nash, because I think in 2s he's awesome. In 1s, I think you could probably do better choices. It's similar to Kaya, in my opinion. Basically, the reason I even made the D tier, Queen Nai is still just absolutely not worth it in my eyes. Now, I think the signatures of Nai are really good, but when you look at the stats, when you look at just how Dex affects guitars with her, it's just not worth it whatsoever. Even with the signatures, like, I've said that some of these other characters, it's like, oh, well, why play them when you could play another character? There's still other reasons to justify playing them. You know, you might think it's worth it in, like, more than one aspect. With Nai, just absolutely not worth it. Overall, I think Hattori's kind of, like, fits perfectly into A. Hattori, they buffed the side sig a little bit on sword, which is pretty nice. It's not like a huge game changer, I would say, but I think Hattori's stats are overall really strong. Some of the signatures are really good. Hattori can find equal success in 1s and 2s, even with sword getting nerfed. I just think Hattori's kind of like the definition of a well-rounded legend, so I don't necessarily I don't see a reason to put her any higher. Sure, like Spear side sig in particular is really, really good, but I don't think that's enough to really bump her up into S. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go and put Roland in C. I'll start with his strengths. High defense, that's nice, right? And you don't really need high dex on either of his weapons, so that's also nice. But that kind of, that's kind of where it ends. He's really simple in design, but when you look at the Lance kit specifically, I think the Lance kit blows overall. D-Sig on Lance is really good. I think that's the one thing that's really good, but that's so offset by Side Sig in particular. I think that move is it's terrible. It's not a good signature by any means. The sword kit is really, really good, but other than that, I don't know. I think it's really hard to justify playing Roland in a lot of scenarios unless you're looking to counterpick someone. There are better Lance Legends, ones that might feel more rewarding overall. So it's kind of why not just play them? I'm going to go ahead, and this might be one that people will disagree with. I'm going to go ahead and say Scarlett is going to be in B. The high strength is really good, especially for Hammer and Lance. You're going to be racking up damage a lot quicker. Overall, the SIGs, especially on, I would say, honestly on Hammer, they're still really good. But I feel like the weapons, they're somewhat slower overall. Now, Hammer and Lance, I guess, especially on the grounded options, they do have faster things you can do. But I feel like when you get to the characters that are higher up in here, especially when you're looking at the axe characters, bow characters, even gauntlet characters, the high defense that some of these characters have and also the weapons that they have can really negate the benefits of using Scarlett. So that's why she's going to fall into B with some flaws. Now, I think this is kind of not necessarily a shot in the dark, but I think Magyar is probably going to be a pretty well-rounded legend, especially if we see more play of the character. I don't think any of the SIGs are particularly wild, but at the same time, I think having the stats that Magyar does And the SIGs overall, like, there's nothing that stands super far out. Now, depending on like certain maps, maybe D-SIG on both the weapons can be pretty good. But if you can't place them, then maybe killing can be a little bit of an issue. But at the same time, you're not going to die, like, ever. Highest defense in the game, easily. So I think it's a pretty safe answer to put Magyar on A. I'm just curious to see what really happens with this legend. And again, finally, I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to put Reno in A. It's kind of like Magyar, where we haven't really seen too much play of the character. I know Cody Travis, he's definitely played a bit of Magyar. We've seen him play Magyar in tournament. But it's kind of hard to say. I did put all the other, I mean, aside from Dusk, I guess, other orb characters in S. But I think when you look at Reno's probably the weakest out of all the orb characters right now. The signatures are good. I don't think there's any orb signature that necessarily is absolutely nuts. I think that the blaster, like N-Sig and maybe Side Sig, are the best signatures on the character. I don't know necessarily. I'm not a huge Reno player. It's kind of hard to speak on that. But the stats are overall pretty good. And yeah, I mean, having blasters I think kind of hurts the character a little bit. But overall, I mean, even then, I think the character can find success. All right, so we made a couple changes. I mean, honestly, a lot of changes. So I put this like tier above. Nothing's in it, obviously, but I figured it'd be good to just have this so we could establish what at least I think personally right now is meta. Axe, bow, they're the weapons that didn't really get touched in the last patch, and as a result, that kind of boosts them a bit. Sword, I think Sword, even though, yeah, it did get nerfed a bit, I think it's always going to find a way to weave its way into the meta. And then Gauntlets, even though Gauntlets, out of probably every weapon in the patch, I think that Gauntlets still are going to be very relevant just because I think they do really, really good into Axe, even if they do take a little more effort now. As I said before, the only tier that is ordered is S tier. Now, some of you may disagree, some of you may agree. I don't know. You might fall in between, but I think this is a pretty decent idea of where all the legends stand. It's just so hard because opinion is really what comes into play here. Like, you know, you can make an argument that Volkov's higher than Mirage or, you know, vice versa. It's really hard. So don't take this for, you know, for what it is. Take it as a bit of an interpretation, if anything. Like, you can move things around for sure. It's just, this is what I ended up coming up with chat. Yeah, this did take a while to make, so, you know, I'd appreciate if you guys would subscribe. Honestly, leave a comment, whatever, you know what to do. Yeah, I'm really curious what you guys would have changed, or if you agree. Like I said, just let me know in the comments, and I guess I'll see you in the next video, which will be the weapons tier list. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you around. Peace, guys.